Hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel. It's been about a week since Booktube-A-Thon has wrapped up, and today I wanted to talk about the books that I read and what I thought about them. So let's just get to it. To start off, I read Paranormal See by Kiersten White. This was my book for the author who shares the same first initial of your last name, in my case W. This was actually a really fun read to start off Booktube-A-Thon with. It's a YA supernatural kind of paranormal story about a girl who works for a paranormal containment agency. So she goes after rogue vampires or rogue werewolves and, you know, stuff like that, and works with other paranormal entities. And as she's going about her job, she ends up finding some things out about herself, that she's not exactly as normal as she grew up spending her life thinking she was. This was a really fun read. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Comparative to a lot of other paranormal, like teen style books, I found that the character was really believable. She acted like a 16-year-old girl, and not in any sort of negative or stereotypical way, but everything wasn't overly serious, and that's something I find a lot in paranormal stories that I really liked, that this had fun, this had humor to it, this had really good character relations, especially when you consider that she's a 16-year-old girl who was raised in a really unusual situation with no one her own age, really no one her own species for that matter. And I feel like this handled that really well. It took some really interesting aspects of fairy lore that aren't touched on all the time. This takes the more serious look at fairies instead of the like kind of Disney pixie style fairy. And I'm really excited to read the next book in the series. I was actually really bummed that I kind of chose this as my first book because all I wanted to read the rest of the week was the second book, but that didn't fit in with my Booktube-A-Thon like TBR list. So that's definitely something I'm looking forward to reading soon. Second up, I wanted to really tackle my larger books at the beginning of the week just because I didn't know where my week was going to take me. So next up was The Winter's Curse by Marie Ratowski. This book surprised me. I'm not going to lie, I really wasn't anticipating reading this book. Even though I'd heard so many good things about it, just the back of it sounded a lot kind of like a Romeo and Juliet story. The star-crossed lovers, the tragic endings. It wasn't something that really drew me in, but really the description of this book does a disservice to how excellent this is. It's a lot more political than you would have gotten from reading the description. It's very political. There's a lot of war strategizing, there's different ideas on class and where you fit into society when everything's flipped upside down. The characters are really well fleshed out, especially your two main characters, Kestrel and Aaron. Just so good, and really surprised. The ending surprised me. Just kind of how it didn't really wrap a whole lot up. I did not see that ending coming, and I'm really looking forward to reading the second book. And again, really bad choice of reading a really engaging series during the Booktube-A-Thon, because really all I want to do is go and read the rest of the series. Though I'm gonna be good and hold off on this one just because I know the third one isn't coming out until next year, and I have a feeling, and just from what I've read, trying to stay spoiler free, that the second book really ends on a cliffhanger that I don't know that I want to wait until next March to find out what happens. So I'm gonna try to be good and hold off on this. But surprising read. This was probably my biggest surprise from Booktube-A-Thon, just in how much I liked it. Now third up, sticking with my read my longest books at the beginning theme, was Royal Wedding by Meg Cabot, and I'm going to say this book made me angry. I was so looking forward to reading this book and all of the potential that it had, but even though this book is supposed to be taking place almost 10 years after the ending of the last book, the characters are exactly the same. They talk about drinking and sex more often, but that's really the only thing that's changed. Here we are to believe that Mia has gone for almost 10 years. She is friends with the exact same people. They have the exact same relationships. She struggles with the exact same issues and has the exact same voice. You have a throwaway line about her two college roommates that she spent her 4 years of college at, and are we to be expected that she didn't make friends with them? I mean, she didn't mention that they were bad roommates either. It was disappointing because it could have been so much more. What ended up saving the book for me, though, was that there was enough nostalgia that there was a nostalgia to enjoy. If you have read and enjoyed the Princess Diaries series, I would recommend at least picking this up and giving it a read, because it gives a lot of characters closure in a way that you didn't get from the original series, and it's fun to revisit them. It really is. And I really am pleased with how they introduced the new character. I don't want to spoil too much, but her name's Olivia, and there's going to be a new middle grade spin-off series based on her, and she seems like a really engaging, interesting character that I'm excited to read about. And because she's so new, she didn't suffer from that problem of being stuck in the same place for 10 years. So I'm excited about that. In the end, this was about a 3 out of 5 for me. So it was a fun read, but for how much more it could have been, I was not particularly happy with it. Now, talking about books that make me angry, number 4 was Jane Jones' Worst Vampire Ever by Cassie St. Onge. This book was terrible, and I tried so hard. There were so many interesting things. The idea of a vampire who is allergic to blood and has to find other ways to survive. The idea of vampires who are turned at a certain age are stuck perpetually at that age. Like, so many things that could have been explored and really haven't been explored, at least in what I've read from vampire fiction. But the characters were just so flat. Here we are to believe that you have a 16-year-old girl who's in high school, who's been a perpetual high schooler for like 75 years, and is still struggling with the exact same thing. She still is completely socially awkward, completely just out of her element, and not just in like a social sense, but just even in like a knowledge-based sense. And they tried to explain it with the idea of when you are turned at a certain age, in her case 16, that makes you stay perpetually that age. But even at the age of 16, you would be more mature than this, especially if you've been that age for that long. I thought this was a middle grade book, and really that's how it read, but this actually ends up being a YA book. They talk about drinking and partying, and she's in high school, but really beyond that, her character and several of the other main characters really act like they're in middle school. They have middle school kind of style drama, and then they had this whole farm kind of subplot from when she was turned into a vampire that was just really confusing and really out of place. And this book went so many directions, and for a book that's only, I mean, it's 190 pages, it's not a big book. It went too many places, it went too many storylines, too many characters, and too many voices. It was just very confusing, and it was not really a fun read. It still got 2 out of 5 stars for me, just because it did tackle some really interesting concepts that I would be interested to see fleshed out again in the future, but this book was definitely not a win for me. Thankfully, the next book kind of broke that little rut for me, and that was Rebel Mechanics by Shanna Swenson. This book was fantastic. This was a 5 out of 5 stars. It was just gripping from start to finish. I was a little nervous going into this book. All of her other series are contemporary, even though they involve elements of fantasy. They're set in the modern world, they're set with characters from the modern world, so I wasn't sure how she was going to handle kind of an alternate history take on the Victorian period, but it's just fantastic. It takes a look at the Victorian period as if the Revolutionary War never happened. The British are still in control, predominantly because they use magisters. They have a magic class, essentially, that controls everything. And so you don't have machinery, you don't have electricity in the traditional sense. You have people who instead use their magic to power these things, and they set up a few things that I think that are going to be used in later books, because this is supposed to be a series, and I'm really excited to see where they go with that idea. But you pit these two groups against each other. You have the magisters, and then you have the rebel mechanics. They're a group of steam-powered inventors who are trying to take back the city, take back the country from British rule. They're trying to prove that you don't have to have magic to be a useful member of society, but some of their tactics that they use aren't exactly noble either. So you have the main character, Verity, who's really torn between the two. She's gone to work for a Magister household for a boss who isn't exactly what he seems. She falls in love with a man from the rebel mechanics and starts to make friends with them, only to find out that some of their tactics are incredibly shady. So just she's caught in that balance this whole novel, while the universe is also having some extra problems. So she's getting torn between these problems, in between these two groups, and it's just so good. Her world building is really excellent. She really goes into detail, and you really get a sense of what this world would be. It's set in New York, so you get a sense of what New York would be like in the Victorian period if it was still under British rule, with the added magical elements. And just, I could not recommend this enough. If that sort of things at all interests you, if you like historical fiction, if you like the whole steampunk perspective, this is absolutely something you need to pick up. And even if those aren't your normal thing, I would still recommend picking this up. It reads like an adult novel, but it is still in that YA realm. The main character is 16, though 16 means a very different thing in that time period than it would today. But it's an excellent read from start to finish, and I'm very excited to see more from this series. So Shanna Swenson does it again, another fantastic series. Now, to finish off Booktube-A-Thon, I had thought I was going to be really behind by this point, but instead I was actually doing pretty well. So I ended up having 2 graphic novels that I finished pretty quickly. First up was Lumberjanes, and as expected, it was so cute. It was so much fun. This was a 4 out of 5 stars for me. It was exactly what I was expecting. It's a paranormal take on summer camp with a set of girls. It's an all-girls camp, and just the kind of creatures they interact with, the secrets of the camp itself. You see that the head of the camp is more than what she would seem, though we haven't gotten super introduced to her character yet. You get to know their camp counselor, who is just totally in over her head with these girls and what they're seeing, because she definitely does not believe what's going on at first. And it's fun. It is fun. It is great to see some kick-butt female characters handled like in a really cute way, because they're kick-butt, but then they're also kids, and they're not being taken as super seriously in the sense of they're not being forced to grow up. They are kids, and this is how kids would interact with these supernatural things, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. The characters are all unique, and they're all funny, and they all have their own unique voice, and I'm just really excited to see where this series goes. And the art is just fantastic. And if you buy, this is the compilation of the first 4 books, and if you buy that, you get to see all the covers and all the alternate covers that you would have gotten should you have purchased the individual issues, and it's great, and I could not recommend this enough. Last up, I read the